What if the deadliest pandemic in human history did not begin where we always believed? What if the origins of the Black Death, the disease that decimated nearly half of Europe's population in the 14th century, lay hidden not in the crowded alleys of Venice or the bustling ports of Constantinople, but in a far more remote and silent place? The Black Death remains one of history's most terrifying mysteries. For centuries, chroniclers described it as a plague that appeared suddenly, spreading with a force so overwhelming that no city, no fortress, no kingdom could resist it. It swept through Europe like a storm, leaving behind silence where once there was laughter, desolation where once there were thriving streets. Yet the question that haunted historians and scientists alike was deceptively simple. Where did it truly begin? This is not a tale of kings and battles, but of something smaller, something invisible, an enemy that lived in the blood of rodents, carried by the bite of a flea. To answer this question, we must travel back beyond the ruins of medieval Europe to the lonely highlands of Central Asia, where an ancient clue lay waiting for centuries. High on the desolate steppes of Central Asia, the wind sweeps across snow-capped ridges and echoes over barren valleys. Here, in the shadow of Lake Issyk-Kul, an inland sea framed by mountains, a small Christian trading community thrived in the early 14th century. Their village, known as Karajigak, stood as a fragile link in the Great Silk Road network that bound China, Persia, and Europe together. In 1886, Russian archaeologists stumbled upon two weathered cemeteries belonging to this forgotten community. At first glance, the gravestones seemed unremarkable, carved in the Syriac language of the Nestorian Church, etched with simple prayers for the dead. But then came the revelation. On many of the stones, a chilling inscription appeared again and again. Died of pestilence. The dates were even more unsettling. 1338. 1339. A decade before Europe would collapse under the Black Death, death had already erupted here, in this remote village. Beneath the stones lay hundreds of skeletons, their story sealed in silence. For decades, these bones were locked away in the vaults of a museum in St. Petersburg, collecting dust. A forgotten archive, waiting for modern science to rediscover it, and with it, perhaps, the true beginning of history's darkest plague. More than a century after the cemeteries were excavated, the inscriptions resurfaced in the hands of a young Scottish historian. While sifting through records of medieval trade, he noticed the unusual cluster of deaths. Over the span of just 2 years, more than 100 people from that small Issyk-Kul community had perished. It was too sudden, too concentrated, to be explained by famine or war. The pattern suggested an epidemic, an outbreak that flared violently, then burned out. But to link these deaths to the Black Death was speculation. The historian's notes posed a tantalizing possibility. What if this remote graveyard marked the very spark that ignited Europe's catastrophe? The question demanded proof. Ancient inscriptions alone could not reveal the killer. Only the remains themselves could speak across the centuries. Bones and teeth, mute witnesses buried beneath the steppe, might hold microscopic traces of the invisible enemy. And so, the torch passed from history to science. The key to the mystery no longer lay in chronicles or dusty archives, but within the molecular code of the dead. If answers existed, they would be found in the genetic whispers sealed inside enamel and bone. At the Max Planck Institute in Germany, A team of geneticists accepted the challenge. Their task, to extract fragments of DNA from the teeth of villagers who had perished nearly 700 years earlier. Teeth, unlike fragile flesh or decaying organs, endure the centuries. Their hard enamel acts as a vault, preserving the blood that once flowed through living veins. The scientists drilled into the teeth with microscopic precision, releasing powder fine as dust. Within that powder lay ancient blood traces. If a pathogen had struck, its fingerprints might still remain. Inside sterile laboratories, sequencers hummed, computers processed millions of fragments, and slowly, piece by piece, a genetic puzzle began to take shape. The data streamed in like echoes from the past, and then, buried among the fragments, appeared an unmistakable signature: Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for plague. The discovery electrified the scientific world. These villagers by Lake Issyk-Kul had not merely died of pestilence. They were victims of the very microbe that would, within years, devastate an entire continent. The bones, silent for centuries, had finally spoken, and their testimony would soon overturn centuries of speculation about the origins of the Black Death. Once the genome of the Issyk-Kul plague strain was reconstructed, scientists compared it with more than 1,300 other samples of Yersinia pestis collected worldwide, from medieval graves in Europe to more recent outbreaks in Asia and Africa. What emerged was astonishing. The 1338 strain was no ordinary variant. It occupied a pivotal position on the plague's family tree, a branching point from which 4 great lineages spread across the globe. In other words, the graves at Issyk-Kul captured the bacterium in the very moment it exploded into diversity. One of those lineages would become the infamous Black Death, sweeping into Europe and the Middle East, rewriting history for centuries. The implications were profound. This remote Central Asian village, once no more than a dot on the Silk Road, was now revealed as ground zero of the deadliest pandemic humanity has ever known. From a single community of traders carrying pearls from the Indian Ocean and coins from Persia came not just prosperity, but a silent killer destined to alter civilization itself. The mystery was no longer where the Black Death began. The answer lay in stone inscriptions, in broken teeth, in DNA. The true question became, why there, and why then? To answer that question, scientists turned not to bones, but to the environment. Paleoclimate records revealed that the early 1330s were marked by an unusual shift, a sequence of warm, wet springs across Central Asia. Grasslands bloomed, rivers swelled, and rodent populations surged. Marmots, gerbils, and other wild hosts multiplied in vast numbers. More rodents meant more fleas, and fleas were the true vehicles of plague, leaping from animal to animal, carrying Yersinia pestis in their gut. In this fragile balance, a single ecological spark could tip the scales. Perhaps it began with a fur hunter skinning an infected marmot. Perhaps a trader carried a flea-ridden pelt into the village. What had once been confined to wild ecosystems spilled into human life. The barrier between species collapsed, and the plague leapt across. Karajigak was not isolated. It was a crossroads. Merchants arrived with silk from China, spices from India, silver from Persia. Alongside treasures came stowaways, black rats, their fleas already infected. The Silk Road, once celebrated as the artery of prosperity, had become the bloodstream of a killer. The Black Death was not a random accident. It was the product of climate, commerce, and chance. forces converging to unleash catastrophe. From a lonely cemetery on the steppes of Central Asia, modern science has pieced together the origins of humanity's darkest chapter. A few weathered gravestones, etched with the words, "died of pestilence," have proven to be more than epitaphs. They are signposts pointing to the birthplace of the Black Death. The consequences of this revelation stretch far beyond medieval history. It reminds us that civilization is bound not only by kings, empires, and armies, but by microbes, climate shifts, and chance encounters with the natural world. The fate of continents can hinge on the bite of a flea, the swelling of a river, or the trade routes carved across deserts. Yet the story is not finished. For every mystery solved, another emerges. How many more silent cemeteries lie buried beneath dust and stone, their bones still carrying whispers of forgotten catastrophes? What other inscriptions, half erased by time, hold the keys to rewriting what we thought we knew about our past? History, it seems, is not written only in ink. It is written in genes, in soil, in bones, and in the invisible life that moves among us. The past has never been silent. It has only been waiting for us to listen.